All right, everybody. So we have completed our last unit. We are on to our next one, and that is called the United States Constitution, the beginning. It's the United States Constitution. Today we're starting with the beginning of it. We are going to move fairly quickly for the next couple of weeks. We have a lot to still cover. So we're going to go through the United States Constitution today and tomorrow very quickly. You will be listening to your lesson, and then you will be completing kind of like an exit ticket quiz kind of thing on Google, in Google Classroom. Not on Mastery Connect, in Google Classroom. So that's what you'll do. We'll talk about success criteria here in a moment. But let's go ahead and get started. Our objective today, the Constitution, is what we're talking about. Remember, the Constitution is kind of like the law of the land, okay? And we have to kind of talk about where that started, because it's really important to understand that this document, our government, the whole idea of our government was very revolutionary. It was not something that was done really anywhere else. And since our founding fathers created this document, lots of other countries have followed our example, and our government is still working 200 years later. So it's really very important to understand what they went through to get here, by knowing that they fought in the Revolutionary War to gain independence, and then what they did, how they got together and they came up with the brilliant idea of what we still have today. So it's quite important to understand, so make sure that you're listening very closely. Today your objective is that you can answer questions about what the colonists wanted in a government, the failure of the Articles of Confederation, and the decision made at the Continental Convention. So, sorry, that should be the Constitutional Convention, sorry. We're covering several chapters, so that's why it's kind of like one big objective, but there's like three. You can answer questions about what the colonists wanted in their government. You can answer questions about the failure of the Articles of Confederation, and then you can answer questions about the Constitutional Convention. You, at the end, to show your success, or what you, how you know you were successful in listening to your lesson today, is that you can complete the exit ticket in Google Classroom to show your understanding. It is 10 questions, so it shouldn't take you very long, and it does tell you if you get your answers correct or you don't, so you can kind of see how you did. So backing up a little bit, we ended at Yorktown in the American Revolution, and that pretty much ended the American Revolutionary War. So America won. We were now independent from Great Britain. We were a new nation. But that wasn't the end of things. We didn't just move on. Now the colonists were faced with something big. They had to decide how they were going to run the government of this brand new nation. They couldn't go on with what they had, which was a monarchy, where they had a king who ran everything, and then they also had a parliament that kind of split the powers with the king. So they didn't really want to follow the exact example that they had, but the idea that they had came from lots of ideas, and they needed to come up with something that would work for them. So today what we're going to talk about is to help you understand the idea that they came up with, and understand what kind of government that they went with, is we're going to first talk about the idea of self-government. We're going to talk about what the colonists wanted at first, what they wanted. The Articles of Confederation. It's a very important document to remember. And also its limitations, meaning things that made it not very successful. Limitations meaning it didn't work. And we're also going to talk about their need for something better. And then we're going to talk about the Constitutional Convention. So we are covering a lot today. So the idea of self-government. Well, it's the idea of self-rule. The Declaration of Independence, written by Thomas Jefferson, kind of really furthered what the colonists wanted. when they said that they wanted to have more say in their government. They wanted representatives. They wanted to be able to take control of who was ruling their country. Jefferson really had some revolutionary ideas when he wrote that declaration. And it's really what would forever change how the American people and really people all over the world thought about government. Remember, a king was kind of just born to be the ruler, whether they were a good person or a bad person, they were the king. And so the idea that the people of a country could have a say in how it was ran, that was brand new. And to us, that seems silly because that's just how, that's what born and born and grown up in. And so it's really hard to believe that these people didn't have that. And this was a very new idea. There were three important parts to this, three important ideas. First, in self-government, the main purpose of government in the Declaration of Independence is three important ideas from the Declaration of Independence is that the main purpose of a government and the whole reason to have a government is to protect the rights and liberties of its people. That's the whole point of even having a government. And that's what they felt like the king wasn't providing them before the Revolutionary War. The next idea is that if a government doesn't protect those rights, or even worse, like when King George treated the colonists so badly, the people have the right to get rid of that government and to make a brand new one, which is the whole reason we had the Revolutionary War, the whole idea. Government should get their power from the people themselves. So the power should not be in the ruler, it should be in the people. The people being governed should be the ones deciding what powers their government should have. They should be able to say what their representatives can and cannot do. And the other thing is that people should give consent, which means their permission to the government to rule. So if the people disagree with how the government is doing things, they don't have the permission to do it. If a ruler in this type of government decided that they wanted to, raise taxes by like 80%, so everybody has to pay almost all their money to the government, the people don't want that. That's not their permission. And so there's ways to go about getting the government to do what they want. So this is truly, the power is not in the governor or the president or the mayor. The power is in the people. So it's a limited government. And it's the idea that people should have the right to limit or restrict the power of their government. They didn't want one person to be the most powerful person in the country like the king was, where the king could say and do really anything he wanted. They didn't want that. They wanted the people of the country to be able to say, no, you're really not that powerful. They didn't want, like I said, they didn't want a ruler like the king. They feel like it would cause a bad ruler to make bad choices for their people, which has happened. So the states, there's 13 colonies and now they are 13 states. They had to make their own governments. They weren't making one big government. They were all making their very own governments with these ideas for an inspiration. So what happened next is the colonists in every state discussed and debated what their new governments would look like. And so self-government, the main idea here is that it is the right of a people to govern themselves or to choose their own government. It's the right of a people. So you and me and moms and dads, we're the ones that get to choose our own government. We can choose our own representatives. And I'm going to go back to this slide for a quick second. All of these states, they were coming up with what their government would look like, and they were writing constitutions. Constitutions is a document that basically is the law. It's like the biggest law there is, and it's kind of the law of the land. It's how a government should work. And so it's really just a document that really kind of lists all the powers of the leaders of the government and what each part of the government can do. So each state was writing constitutions. So moving on, what the colonists really wanted, what the Americans really wanted from their constitutions, what they wanted. Each state, like I said about making their constitutions. which is an overall plan for government. And like I said, it was a law. It was like a law, but it was bigger. And it will say what the government will and will not have. So they wanted to make a contract saying what a government can't do. So they started with what they can't do. First, it was really quite simple, going all the way back to the beginning of the Revolutionary War before we even started fighting battles. They wanted separation from England because they felt like their rights of an Englishman were taken away. And so they wanted those rights. That was written in the Declaration of Independence. So they took those ideas and put them in their constitutions. First, no one can search a home without good reason. So police officers, soldiers cannot come into your home and just search without a good reason. And you couldn't put a person in jail without a good reason. You couldn't just walk down the street and dislike somebody and throw them in jail. And you also could not take away a right of a trial by jury. And that means if you are sent to jail, you couldn't just sit there forever without any way to prove yourself innocent. These were rights that were taken from them by England during the whole taxation without representation and all of that. These were things that rights of an Englishman had, and they felt like those rights were kind of taken away from them. They also had the right to assemble peacefully, and they couldn't take away the right of the people to demand that their government to do something they wanted done. And so what was happening before the Revolutionary War is they were demanding that their king give them the right, and their king just kept saying no and no and no. And what they're saying here is that their government cannot do that. If a government has enough people coming to them saying they needed something done, the government had to listen. Some states even added some more rights that the government couldn't take away. So these ones were found in all of the states, but these ones were added by many different ones. First of all, freedom of speech. You could say or write what you wanted without feeling fear of being thrown in prison. You also had, in some states, you had the freedom of religion, which is the government cannot interfere with a person's religious beliefs. So you could worship however you wanted. Some countries to that day still don't have that freedom. So democracy, you've heard that word a lot. This is something that a lot of people think is what the colonists and the Americans and what we are today are, but we're really not. Democracy is where people govern directly. The thing is, so what that means is they get to have a say in every decision. And it sounds like a good idea, but really when you come to think about it, if we took the whole city of West Valley and West Valley wanted to pass a law and every person had, and we were a democracy and every person had a say, the entire city of West Valley would have to go to a building and attend a debate. And so you think about that in West Valley, think about that in the United States. You and me could go to Washington and have our say. The problem is it's not practical. How can you get every citizen of the United States or every citizen of Salt Lake City or every citizen of West Valley into one place to govern? You just can't do that. So it was just really quite impossible in big states. Okay, so that's kind of why we're not really a democracy. And then one thing is they didn't want the government to misuse power, and they wanted a say, so they came up with a different idea. So they wanted the democracy because they wanted a say, because they didn't want their big central government to be super powerful. However, they knew that wasn't very practical, so they came up with something new. And it's called a republic. They wanted a republic, which is a government where they chose or elect representatives. So now all the people of West Valley, they still have a say because they get to elect or vote for a person to represent them in Salt Lake City. Or Utah we get to elect representatives to speak for us in Washington, D.C. That's what a republic is. And so really what we are now, we ended up with a representative democracy, meaning that we were a republic, but the people had a say through their representatives. So what they really wanted is a republic where they elect representatives to rule them. So they elect governors. Eventually they'll elect a president, and that's what we still do today. The Articles of Confederation. So they've got their state governments, their state constitutions pretty set, but they do know they need to have some kind of a central government. But remember, they were really kind of scared of a really powerful central government. They didn't want a central government that was really strong, that could take away the freedoms of the states. So that Second Continental Congress meets again. These are the guys that, remember, they kind of declared war. They wrote the Declaration of Independence, and they were really kind of running the Revolutionary War. Okay, so we're going to rewind a little bit, because during the Revolutionary War, now that they were running the war, they knew they had to come up with some idea for government. So in 1777, so this is still during the Revolutionary War, they met again to agree on a government for the United States of America. Um, they knew they needed a central government, like I said, but they really just kind of disagreed on how much power it should have. And again, they feared that they would have, if they gave it too much power, the same thing that happened with King George would happen all over again. And in 1777, they voted to approve a plan for a new central government called the Articles of Confederation. It had to be debated in each state, though. So after they approved it in 1777, all 13 states took it to their states, and they talked and debated and talked and debated. And it wasn't till 4 years later, in 1781, that it actually went into effect, meaning that there was officially a central government of the United States ruled under what's called the Articles of Confederation. So what was it? First, it created a lawmaking body called the Congress. So there was not one person, there was a group of people called the Congress. But they were not elected by the people of the United States. They were elected by the states. So each state had the people, they had their representatives. So everyone in Virginia voted for their representatives to rule the state of Virginia, their governor. Now, the governors of every state then elected the Congress of the United States. So the Congress really didn't represent the people, they represented the states. So like I said, the states had kind of a political independence. They all had their own government. And the state constitutions that they each had gave all of them lots of power. The states had tons of powers. They were almost kind of like mini countries. And the articles actually gave Congress really not very much power at all. So it was very unbalanced. The states had a ton of power, state governments had a ton of power, and the federal government, or the central government, really didn't have very much power at all. So these are the kind of things that the central government could do. And it sounds really good, and I'm going to tell you why it didn't work here in a minute, though. So first, the Articles of Confederation, the central government, the Congress could declare war and make peace. They could create an army and a navy, and they could send representatives to foreign countries. They could borrow money, and they could establish a systems of weights and measures, and they could establish a post office. And they could print money. So, sounds like some pretty powerful big things. But they had too little power. The articles did not have enough power to work. They didn't end up working very well. That's why it's not used today. Do you ever hear about our American government being run by the Articles of Confederation? You don't. You hear about the Constitution. It's because the articles failed. No matter how big the state was, this is why it didn't work. Okay, so no matter how big the state was in population, they only had one vote. So the teeny, teeny, tiny little bitty state of Rhode Island, their governor's vote counted exactly the same as Virginia, who was the biggest state at the time. And so it didn't represent the people very well. The people, Congress wasn't elected by really didn't represent any of the people of the country at the time, just the governors of the states. And large states really felt that this voting arrangement was unfair. So there was already starting to be some frustrations. Another thing is Congress was always broke, meaning they didn't have any money. They couldn't tax the states. They could only only the states that could tax people and then pay Congress. So if Congress, the central government, needed money, they had to go to each state and say, hey, can you please tax your people and then give me some money? Well, the problem is the states would only give a portion of that money. They wouldn't give all the money of the taxes. So Congress didn't have enough money to raise an army or a navy. Um, so like I said, it worked if the states paid their share, but they didn't always do that. So you can't raise an army, and you can't do hardly anything the power that they had to do without money. Um, and they had to have complete permission from all of the states to do that, and that was almost impossible to do. And so there were some people that decided that they wanted a change. First, James Madison. He's a very important person. He was a smart man who knew a lot about government, and he was part of Virginia's government. He was kind of like one of their leaders. And then there was Alexander Hamilton, and he fought in the war and was very close to Washington, and he served in the New York government. So you've got James Madison, who represents Virginia, and Alexander Hamilton, who represents New York. They both believed that the central government needed to be stronger. So they decided to call all the delegates from the states to another convention. But they told them that the purpose was to improve the Articles of Confederation. They wanted to add to it. That's what they told everybody. But what they really wanted was to get rid of it altogether. So they were kind of sneaky. They knew that if they told everybody that they wanted to get rid of the Articles of Confederation, that a lot of people would disagree and wouldn't show up. So they kind of fibbed a little bit to these people, saying that we do want you to come, we want to amend or make changes to the Articles of Confederation to make this stronger. But their real goal was to get people there so they could listen to their belief that they needed to change it altogether. Without a central government, this is the main point here, without a central government, the Congress didn't have enough power to make the Articles work. There was not enough, really what it comes down to, there was not enough money. They really couldn't do anything with all of this without the states' permissions. So the Articles of Confederation made the United States very weak. They weren't united. So this convention that they invited all the delegates to, this is what we know today is called the Constitutional Convention. A need for power. Okay, guys, so this is where kind of James Madison and Alexander Hamilton were coming from. Many believed the central government needed more power. It wasn't just these two people. There was a lot of people that were very frustrated with the government. Some thought that just amending or adding to the articles would solve the issue, though. They thought maybe we just need to add a rule here and there and everything will be better. But Madison, Hamilton, and George Washington knew that without more power, eventually people would become even more frustrated with the government. And the government couldn't do anything for them. They'd be stuck between a rock and a hard place. They couldn't do anything. So they had come up with a plan that allowed the government to have enough power to act, but not so much power that it would have the power to threaten people's freedoms. That's a hard balance. To give so much power to a government, they really could take the liberties away, but you had to come up with ideas to make it balanced so that the people still had the say in how it was ruled. So under the Articles of Confederation up to this point, without the central government, like I said, the states really weren't united. I told you they were almost like little mini countries. And so it made them very weak. So say the United States was attacked and Congress wanted to form an army. Well, what if they were attacked in the northern states and Georgia didn't really care? Not saying that that would happen, but the Congress could not raise an army to protect the people unless Georgia and those southern states agreed. So that's where it was very weak, because the states were not united. They were not one common country really under this government. Even though they were considered the United States of America, it just really wasn't, they weren't working together. So the delegates did come to Philadelphia. Everyone that was invited did meet in Philadelphia starting in May of 1787. So this is some time after the Revolutionary War. And they had to come up with some very major decisions right away. First, they decided that all the discussions that they had would happen in secret, and this would allow each person to express their ideas freely. They didn't want anybody to be threatened that by the outside to make choices. They wanted everyone in there to be free to think and talk and speak freely. Next, they decided that George Washington was going to be the chairman or the leader of the convention. And it was pretty obvious why. He was a very famous individual. He pretty much won the Revolutionary War, and everybody really adored him. So they started debating. All of the delegates spoke, and there were a lot of them. Many of them spoke. Alexander Hamilton and James Madison spoke quite a bit. There was one man, though, that came up with this plan. It's called the Virginia Plan, and his name was Edmund Randolph. He was the governor of Virginia, and he was given the duty of presenting ideas he had about what government should be. And what he thought government should do was first to protect people against its enemies, and nobody argued that. He also believed that government should protect freedoms. Again, no one argued that. He also believed that the government should control trade between states. Nobody argued that. Thought that was a pretty good duty for a central government. He also believed that the central government should do things for the good of the people, not just one state. They wanted the central government to work for everybody. And again, nobody disagreed with that. And he also believed that a government should raise money through some taxation. Now, taxation's not always bad. You need money to run a government. You need to build schools, you need to build roads, and so taxes were pretty important. But again, the Articles of Confederation really limited the power for the Congress to actually say, I need money. The states were responsible for that, and Virginia didn't necessarily want to pay for schools in New York kind of thing. So it was very difficult for the Congress to raise any money. So he continued that under the Articles of Confederation, the government really couldn't do any of these things. But why? And I kind of went on to talked about this, but the government needed to be able to raise an army without begging the states for soldiers, and they needed to collect taxes without having to beg states for money. They shouldn't have to wait on the decisions of the states to do these things. And it really needed more power. The central government needed more power. And that made people really uncomfortable because they were afraid really did not want the same type of government that they just got out of. This caused a lot of debate, a lot of uncomfortable debates, because he wanted a central government that had some higher powers than the state. So the state still has power, but the central government still was kind of higher. They were kind of made more important decisions. And people were scared that if they allowed too much power, it would turn into what they just fought to leave. So there was a lot of debating over this, tons and tons of debating. But on June 19th, it was finally decided after James Madison gave a really long speech to the delegates that they all agreed to get rid of the Articles of Confederation altogether. Instead of amending and adding laws, they just decided to scrap it and start from scratch, and they wanted to rewrite a new constitution. And the Virginia Plan would be a very important inspiration for what they would end up writing. The decision was made that they were going to do that, but now they were tasked with writing a constitution. This is very difficult, that created a strong central government while also staying true to the republic that was made by and for the people that it governed. And so these men had to work really hard and come up with a great plan. And this was not easy. It took a long time. And tomorrow we're going to actually talk about what they came up with and really truly understand why it was so brilliant and why it's so revolutionary and why it is still working today, even 200 years later. That is all I have for you today. We haven't gotten to the Constitution yet. Now we just have the decision to write a new Constitution. So now I want you to, oh sorry, I forgot to add this. The Virginia Plan was a plan to replace the Articles of Confederation, to replace them, not to add. Okay, so they wanted to create a more strong central government. That was the main idea there, is that they wanted a more central government. So sorry. That, like I said, that's all I have for you today. Tomorrow we're going to actually talk about the Constitution, the actual plan that these founding fathers came up with. So today, what I want you to do is to complete the exit ticket in Google Classroom. It is linked. It was where you found your lesson right here. It's a Google form. Once you answer your questions, it will tell you if you got it correct or didn't, and then you submit it. I hope you guys have a wonderful day.